I'll introduce myself. My name is Mike Basile. I'm the Public Affairs Officer and Community Involvement Coordinator for the United States Environmental Protection Agency. I'd like to welcome you to the 18 Mile Creek Proposed Remedial Action Plan public meeting. Thank you for taking the time to come out for this meeting tonight. I just want to give you a few little ground rules, okay? The meeting is being videotaped and will eventually be transcribed into the public record, and we'll have a transcript. So I ask you to just give our speaker, the remedial project manager, the opportunity to make the presentation. And then when he's done, we'll go into a question and answer period, at which time I will come up to you with this microphone, and I will ask you to just remember, state your name, spell your name, and give us your address for the public record. And then go into the official transcript. We have a few individuals from different agencies that are here this evening. Some of them will not be speaking, some may be answering questions, and I'd like to recognize them at this time. From the New York State Department of Health, Sarah Bogardus. Sarah, it's right here. From the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Steve Moeller. Thank you, Steve. From our agency, who won't be speaking but possibly will be answering some questions, is Pete Menino from our Superfund program, right here. Kelly Gaffney from our Superfund program, and Marion Olson, our risk assessor with EPA. We also have two other individuals I'd like to recognize at this time. Scott Collins from Cornell Cooperative Extension. He works on 18 Mile Creek, the area of concern, and he's the remedial coordinator. Scott. And from the city of Lockport, Mark Devine, the 3rd Ward Alderman from the city of Lockport. Mark?
We also got a county legislature there too, that just came in.
Oh, just came in. Your first name again?
Carla Speranza. I represent part of Lower Town and the north end of the city of Lockport.
Carla, welcome and welcome to the meeting.
And also Michelle
The
Roman,
former mayor, the former mayor of Lockport, Michelle Roman. Thank you. Thanks very much, Mark. Thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to call upon our remedial project manager, Christopher O'Leary, who will make the presentation and explain to you the history of the site and why we're here this evening. Christopher?
Good evening and welcome to the 18 Mile Creek Operable Unit 3 Proposed Plan Public Meeting. I appreciate and thank everyone for listening to the next steps with regards to the site. My name is Christopher O'Leary, and as mentioned, I am the remedial project manager for the 18 Mile Creek Superfund site. We did the team introductions already, but just call out again, I am the remedial project manager. Mike Basile is the community involvement coordinator. Pete Menino is the Western New York Remediation Section Supervisor. Marion Olson, down there in purple, is the Human Health Risk Assessor. And then we have representatives from the New York State Department of Health and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Tonight's agenda, I'm here tonight, as mentioned, to present to everyone the proposed cleanup plan for the 18 Mile Creek Superfund site. This presentation will provide an overview of the proposed cleanup plan, and more details can be found within the July 19 proposed plan document. The agenda will be split into 5 parts, and they include an overview of the Superfund process, a brief site background, the cleanup options and preferred alternatives, EPA's next steps. Lastly, the meeting will be open to question and answer comment period. This presentation should last about 20 minutes. To begin, I would like to explain a little bit about Superfund, or something called CERCLA, which stands for the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. CERCLA was passed in 1980 by Congress. The law provides funding for cleanup of hazardous waste sites. It also grants the EPA the authority to require potential responsible parties to pay for cleanup activities. This next slide here is a flow diagram of the Superfund process. As seen here in the top left, blue blocks, this is an initial discovery of the site, and it begins with the preliminary assessment. The site is then evaluated for possible addition to the national priorities list, and at that time, it would become an official Superfund site, the second box here. A remedial investigation is conducted to understand the nature and extent of the contamination at the site, and a feasibility study is performed to analyze the different methods available to clean up the site. Then we issue a proposed plan, which is what we're here tonight to talk about. After listening to the community's concerns and comments, we will take all of that into account and issue something called a record of decision, which documents the selected remedy for the site. Then we move on to the remedial design and the remedial action phase, which is when we sit down with the contractors, we review how the cleanup will proceed, and discuss next steps that are taken to implement and construct the remedial design, as you can see down here. Then we have the construction completion phase, and the site then is deleted from the national priorities list and to be reused by the community. As you can see with the the green bubble here, community involvement is important and it is included with all steps of the Superfund process. So again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. A little background information on the 18 Mile Creek site. The site is located in Niagara County, New York. The main channel of the 18 Mile Creek originates just south of Erie Canal and flows north for about 15 miles until it discharges into Lake Ontario, located in Olcott, New York. The creek watershed includes two main tributaries, the East Branch of 18 Mile Creek and Gulf Creek. 18 Mile Creek has had a long history of industrial use dating back to the 19th century when it was used as a source of hydropower. There were several properties along and adjacent to the creek where various forms of manufacturing occurred, resulting in contamination of the soils and creek sediments. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation conducted numerous studies of 18 Mile Creek before the site was listed on the national priorities list in 2012. EPA, since then, has conducted supplemental investigations to build upon what the state has already done. Now I will provide just a brief overview of the site. Site remediation activities are sometimes separated into different phases or operable units, OUs, so that remediation of different aspects of the site can proceed separately, resulting in a more efficient and expeditious cleanup of the entire site. The 18 Mile Creek site has been divided into operable units to address contamination more efficiently in this case. OU1 addresses the risk associated with residential soil contamination at 9 residential properties located on Water Street and threats posed by the former flint coat plant building seen on the figure in blue. Oops. Up here. This is OU1. OU2 addresses the contamination sediment in the approximate 4,000-foot segment of the creek corridor, seen in the figure in yellow, red, purple, and green. So yellow, red, purple, and green. This is what we consider OU2. OU4 addresses lead contamination soil at certain residential properties on Mill Street and several other adjoining residential streets east of the former flint coat plant property seen in orange here. I'm here tonight to talk to you about operable unit 3 and specifically about the cleanup plan to address the sediment in this portion of the site. Although EPA's operable unit 3 investigation of the creek initially included the full length of the creek downstream of Harwood Street discharging into Lake Ontario, EPA has redefined the operable unit 3 area. You might be wondering why it was redefined. It was due to the large size and complexity of the original operable unit 3, so it was subdivided into smaller manageable pieces. The original piece started at the end of OU2 and had discharged all the way up to Lake Ontario. So what you see here in the red circle is the new defined operable unit 3 area. The downstream extent of the new subset area was determined based on creek characteristics and sediment mixing. It was also subdivided this way because the contamination levels to be discussed in the next slide. The cleanup plan is addressing specific areas as a means of source control. The subset area, the full length of the creek, beginning from Harwood Street, extending downstream for about 5.3 miles. Adjacent floodplain soils that have been impacted by the creek are also included. It's also important to note that any portions of the creek downstream of OU3 that are not included will be addressed under further operable units. It's comprised of sediments within a portion of the creek referred to as the Sediment Transitional Area, or STA. I will talk about the STA further now. As you may recall, the contaminants of concern for 18 Mile Creek are PCBs and lead. The previous investigations performed revealed that within the STA area, again, this red circle on the figure, contains about 21% of the overall mass of PCBs within the creek. It also contains the highest contaminant concentrations in the sediment downstream of OU2. Other characteristics of something we call the STA is it erodes easily and is acting as a source of contamination to the rest of 18 Mile Creek and has a large area of the creek and a large volume of sediment. Any floodplain soils adjacent to operable unit, these include residential, commercial, and agricultural properties, will be included. At a minimum of 29 adjacent floodplain properties will be addressed in this proposed plan action. The EPA is aware that additional sampling is necessary to further define areas that may require remediation. Additional properties within the STA may include based upon future sampling and risk assessments. As part of the remedial investigation and feasibility study, remedial action objectives, or RAOs, were developed. Remedial action objectives are goals to protect human health and the environment. I won't read this slide word for word, but in summary, these bullets state that current and future risk will reduce, prevent, and the migration of contaminants will be minimized. These RAOs are consistent with upgradient record of decisions for operable units 1 and 2. To achieve the RAOs, EPA has set goals, or something we refer to as preliminary remediation goals, or PRGs, for the contaminated soil to obtain a degree of cleanup that ensures the protection of human health and the environment. As you can see here on the chart, on the lower bottom of the slide, the interim cleanup goal for PCBs in sediment is 1 part per million. The PRGs are consistent with the PRGs established in the OU2 remedy. Next, we will discuss the goals for the floodplain soils. EPA has selected preliminary remediation goals for cleaning up of the soil as well. These values have been selected based on land use of either residential or commercial for PCBs and lead. More details can be found in the proposed plan document regarding to these PRGs. Now that we've discussed the site background, we're aware of the contamination and the cleanup goals for the sediment and floodplain soils. I would like to now review how the remediation will accomplish these goals. The EPA evaluates the alternatives against 9 criteria to ultimately select a preferred remedial alternative. The first 2 are threshold criteria, meaning they must be met. It must protect human health and the environment on or near the site. It also must meet all federal, state, and environmental regulations. The next 5 criteria, 3 through 7, are known as balancing criteria. They have trade-offs and are assessed individually so that the best option can be chosen given the site-specific data and conditions. The final 2, 8 and 9, are modifying criteria because new information or comments from the community may provide and modify the preferred remedial alternative and cause other alternatives to be considered. Now that we're aware of how each alternative is evaluated, I want to discuss them individually. There are 5 alternatives that we've developed for the sediment cleanup of OU3. The first alternative looks at what happens if we take no action. This alternative is used as a baseline to compare to other alternatives. Under this sediment alternative, there will be no remediation conducted at the site for the sediments. The alternative also does not include any monitoring. The cost of this sediment alternative is $0. The second alternative, STA2, Monitored Natural Recovery, Long-Term Monitoring and Institutional Controls for sediment, relies on naturally occurring transport and deposition of cleaner upstream material to reduce exposure to contaminant concentrations over time through burial. This alternative also includes long-term monitoring, which would be developed during the remedial design to track PCB concentrations in sediment, surface water, and fish tissue. It also includes institutional controls. An example of an institutional control would be the quote-unquote do not eat fish consumption advisory. No sediment would be removed under this alternative, and the cost for STA number 2 is $1,999,000. The third alternative, STA3, Excavation, Long-Term Monitoring and Institutional Controls, includes the excavation of all sediment, consistent with the response selected for the OU2 remedy of a bank-to-bank excavation down to native material. This alternative also includes long-term monitoring and institutional controls. An estimated 96,000 cubic yards of sediment would be removed under this alternative. The cost is $82,440,000. Alternative 4 includes the excavation of Alternative 4, STA4, pre-dredge to accommodate capping, long-term monitoring, and institutional controls, includes the excavation of approximately 1 foot of contaminated sediment in areas that exceed the remedial action levels. This alternative also includes long-term monitoring and institutional controls. An estimated 41,000 cubic yards of sediment would be removed, and the cost is $53,025,000. Last, the fifth alternative, excavation to remedial action levels, long-term monitoring and institutional controls, is excavation of contaminated sediment above the remedial action levels. This alternative also includes long-term monitoring and institutional controls. An estimated 54,000 cubic yards of sediment would be removed under this alternative. The cost is $769,000. Now we will discuss the alternatives for the floodplain soils. The first alternative looks at what happens, again, if we take no action. This alternative is only used as a baseline to compare to the other alternatives. This has no remediation, no monitoring, and 0 cubic yards of floodplain removal. The cost for soil 1 floodplain soil alternative is $0. The alternative 2, titled Limited Floodplain Soil Excavation, Soil Cover, and Institutional Controls, which lead and PCB contaminated floodplain soil would be addressed through a combination of excavation and/or installation of a cover system based on land use. This alternative would require institutional controls due to the contamination remaining in place. An institutional control may include environmental easements, restrictive covenants, and deed notices. An estimated 5,000 cubic yards of sediment would be removed. 5,000 cubic yards of soil would be removed. The cost is $39,363,000. Alternative 3, titled Floodplain Soil Excavation and Offsite Disposal, includes the excavation and offsite disposal of PCB and lead-contaminated floodplain soil exceeding the remedial goals adjacent to the STA regardless of land use. These areas would be backfilled with clean material and topsoil. This alternative would require institutional controls due to contamination remaining in place at commercial properties. An estimated 39,000 cubic yards of soil would be removed. The cost is estimated at $131,307,000. In the next slide, I will provide the EPA's preferred alternatives for both of these topics. On this slide, these two tables summarize EPA's preferred alternatives. The top table is for the sediment alternative, and the bottom table is a summary for the soil alternative. The charts also include the amount of contaminated soil and sediment that would be removed under each alternative, as well as the cost for each option. To summarize, the preferred sediment cleanup is STA 5, excavation of sediment above remedial action levels in 18 Mile Creek OU3. The preferred soil cleanup, Soil 3, is a targeted removal of PCBs and lead-contaminated floodplain soil exceeding the preliminary remediation goals. The total cost for the preferred alternatives for OU2 is $192,076,000. A further breakdown of the alternative cost are presented in Appendix D of the feasibility study report. The next steps following this meeting is the EPA relies on public input to ensure the concerns of the community are considered in selecting an effective remedy for each Superfund site. To this end, the proposed plan has been made available to the public for public comment period, which began on July 19th and ends August 19th. Comments received at this meeting, as well as comments written during this public comment period, will be included in the appendix of the record of decision. The record of decision will memorialize the selection of the remedy for this operable unit number 3. Copies of the proposed plan and supporting documentation are available at the following information repositories: the Lockport Public Library, the Newfane Public Library, and EPA Region 2 Superfund Record Center. Tonight's presentation and all additional site documents can also be found on the 18 Mile Creek Superfund site webpage. The link is here. Written comments on the proposed plan should be addressed to me at the address you see here on the screen. I will leave this slide up for a few minutes. And now, following this presentation of material, you probably have some questions. So I want to thank you for listening to the presentation. I will turn things back to Mike Basile with the microphone so that he can answer and take some questions.
Really appreciate it. In addition to the information that's on the screen on your agenda, there's information there on how you can reach Chris O'Leary as well. We really value community input. It's truly the cornerstone. I remember when this site went on the national priorities list in 2011 and 2012. And the first meeting we held at Cornell Cooperative Extension in Lockport, we must have attracted close to 100 people. And there still was an awful lot of interest. As Chris indicated, we have been actively involved with doing a lot of sampling and activities, and a lot of work will begin probably within the next month or two. If you live in the Lockport area, in the city of Lockport, you've probably seen an awful lot of equipment being staged, and we're really happy to see that. And we're going to be reaching out to many of the residents who live in that area. You must remember one thing. As a community involvement coordinator, 18 Mile Creek isn't your typical Superfund site. When we deal with Superfund sites, many times they're abandoned facilities or companies that were in business who are no longer in business that have impacted a community, and they could be 20, 30, or 40 acres. This site is a site that I call rambles. It rambles 15 miles from the city of Lockport up towards Olcott, Newfane, towards Wilson, and out into Lake Ontario. It's a massive site, and as Christopher indicated, that we have an awful lot of operable units. And tonight we're here to get your input on the operable unit that he's outlined. We'll be more than happy to entertain questions at this time. And remember, I'll bring the mic to you, and I'll ask you to state your name, spell your name, and your address.
Where did you come up with the 400 ppm level for lead? Because in the hazardous waste business, at 5 milligrams per liter, it's considered a hazardous waste. And you folks have deemed 400 to be acceptable.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify. So you're correct about the concentrations, but there are two different analytical methods. One's the T-clit total, and the other one is one's the T-clit and the other one's the totals. So,
He's a divide by 20 method, so you go 5 times 20. The 100 would be acceptable.
correct, but, so, I'm familiar with the dilution standard that you're talking about, but our cleanup goals are based on New York State and EPA promulgated standards for health-related purposes. And I'll turn it over to Marion, our human health risk assessor, to talk about the 400 number and how it's consistent with EPA's updated policy, right? And I just wanted to clarify the T-clip versus the totals, just so that everyone's aware of that.
We use the adult-led model for adults, and we have a children's model, which is the integrated exposure uptake biokinetic model. And EPA is going through a process right now of looking at the approaches that we're using. And in the proposed plan, we talk about our goal is actually an average of less than 200 and no blood lead level above 5 micrograms per deciliter. So those are the values we will be using. The 400 is basically a not to exceed value within this whole process that we use for the lead. And the models and other information are available on EPA's webpage for the lead models, i.e. UBK for children, and adult lead, which is for older individuals.
Couple things here. Nice seeing you again, Chris. And I'm going to address a couple of the 2 phases of the project. The first phase, I'm going to go right back to first phase. Your cleanup on Mill Street, the soil on Mill Street area, and the adjacent neighborhoods. Okay. I know that you guys have been staging. Have you actually been starting to take soil out yet?
We have not. The goal is
Approximately 2 weeks,
Okay,
the first
thank you.
property, the shovel should be in ground.
Okay, and now my second question pertaining to that is, when you guys start excavating, are you gonna be taking the soil right out, or is it gonna be stored down there at Blue Ox?
No, it's a direct load, right?
Gonna be direct load?
To the disposal facility.
Okay, where is the disposal facility?
We are currently looking at Model City, and we're working through the administrative process to get that approved.
Where, in Lewiston? That's where,
yeah, Lewiston,
it's
Niagara
gonna be
County.
down in Lewiston? Okay, thank you. And now I wanna just ask about your second phase. So I see you, since last time I talked to you, when I met you last year, and when you took over as project manager, we had talked about expanding some of your testing on the Plank Road area, right by our wastewater treatment plant in Lockport. With your new, vision of what needs to be done, did you expand your testing down the Plank Road area for those 6 residents that go to Stone Road?
So what we'd like to do with that area, so that area along Plank Road that we sampled is a low-lying floodplain area, right?
Right.
So after the record of decision is signed, we enter what's called the remedial design phase, where we develop all the specifications on how the cleanup's gonna be done. The first step of that process is to go out and collect additional data to determine exactly what our cut lengths are going to be. Right now, as Chris mentioned, we have limited data and we need to collect additional data. So what you refer to as the expansion is the additional step outs to see how much soil has to be excavated. Now, what the data shows along these floodplain areas is as you move up in elevation in OU3 and further downstream, the concentrations significantly drop off once you are outside of the floodplain. So and we can share that type of data with you. But so the simple answer to your question is that additional sampling would happen as part of the pre-design investigation phase, which would happen after the record of decision, not before it.
Thank you.
Unfortunately broke my back in 2 places. So anyway, I am here tonight to really represent Shirley Nicholas. Shirley Nicholas is the lady who was responsible for the initial investigation into the situation in Lowertown. I'd like to share the picture with you if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
Now, Shirley was approximately 4'4", weighed about 75 pounds, and had a heart of gold. And her goal was to see to it that the contamination in Lowertown was remediated. As she and the number of people that are with me tonight, I wish to introduce our legislator for that area, Carla Speranza, Mark Devine in the back who walked the area with us, our previous mayor, Michelle, and there's a gentleman that's not with us tonight that walked. Now, we would go from house to house, knocking on the doors, asking about the health. One house in particular, the gentleman had cancer, the wife had cancer, they died from cancer, the Chihuahua died from cancer, and the son died from cancer. I was present at Shirley's home when they came in from New York City and they told her that she should tear up her vegetable garden, she should not eat any fruit from the trees, that in addition to that, her shoes should be removed before she went in the house, that the pads of the dog and the cat, they should all be washed. And as we went on further, going down the street, we learned the same thing. They had the same type of contamination. There was a great deal of cancer there. And I cannot say enough nice things about Mike Basile, because Mike has stayed with us year after year after year, trying to see to it that we do have the correct remedial recommendations that are down there. And then I want to say thank you to Kathy Hochul, because it was Kathy Hochul who came to Lockport, and when she was in Congress, she assured us of the $22 million for the cleanup. Without her efforts and without Shirley, there would be nothing being done today. Our concern all along has been the health of the people in Lowertown, and apparently it flows beyond that. It goes down through Newfane to your fishing area where your fish are contaminated. We have been told that to eat one fish could very much endanger your life because of the contamination. And I know everyone that is here, you know, we're all concerned about our brothers and sisters. You know, we're just here to help one another. And again, I cannot say enough nice things about Mike Basile, and thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Jean. Thanks very much.
I live at 6438 Lincoln Avenue in the town of Lockport. However, I am the legislator for District 12, which represents the part of the city of Lockport in northward to Old Niagara Road. But I also grew up out on Johnson Road in between Stone and 104, adjacent to Purdy Road. So very familiar with this part of Lockport and Newfane. And I would like, Mr. O'Leary, if you could you go back a few slides in the presentation? I'd like to just do kind of a deeper dive. We had the recommendation slide. Can you go back to the detailed slides for each of the EPA's recommendations? I just want to check my, right. So STA 5 and soil 3, yes. Could you go back to the detailed slides for each? Yes, okay. Just in my head, I wanted to clear because one of the proposed options was only going 1 foot down. And in my head, I wanted to make sure that the recommendation or the preference of the EPA is to not limit it to 1 foot depth of excavation, that you are going to do, it's basically more, we are looking to go as deep as we sort of need to go here. Is that a correct assumption?
Correct. We will excavate until we get to the remedial action level. The one that you were referring to is this one, STA 4. That's 1 foot and then the capping. So we prefer, and the preferred alternative for the EPA is STA 5.
Okay, thank you. And can you take us to the number 4, the soil 4?
Soil 3.
Sorry, soil 3. Okay.
Soil 3, that's this one.
So basically the same kind of approach.
Correct. This would be soil excavation and off-site disposal. Correct. Of
Okay.
the floodplain soils.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Basile.
Thank you.
My name is Bill Clark. I live in Olcott. Mike and I go way back. We worked on the Love Canal project. I can't believe you're not retired yet. But anyway,
We were younger then, just a little younger then.
I chair the Town of Newfane Planning Board, and then, I think, what you're proposing here, I mean, it's got to be fantastic. I mean, you're talking about spending almost $200 million, to help clean up the 18-mile creek, and much of the work is going to be done in the town of Lockport, city of Lockport, but it's got to be a huge benefit for the town of Newfane, as we look at cleaning up the creek that, as it goes to the mouth of Lake Ontario and Olcott. I guess the question I have is, I think we also here in Newfane have some more immediate problems. I think you're looking at, a lot of what the contamination you're looking at here, the sediment and so forth, what was put there that you're cleaning up was put there decades ago. And, it needs to be cleaned up, that's very clear. But also, even today, as we look at our tourism economy here in Newfane and all the fishing and tourism activity that occurs in Olcott, we're dealing with pressing environmental and pollution problems this day. And we're continuing, to, deal with pollution, that is going on, as we speak here. Specifically, we're told, that, there may be pollution issues related to agricultural runoff. There may be pollution issues related to industrial output. There may be pollution issues related to sewage treatment. There may be contamination issues related to birds and avian, gulls and cormorants and others. So there's a whole, this project here looks at, some of the issues that go way back, and it targets a very defined area under the Superfund, and I appreciate that. But I guess I'm talking more to like some of the state environmental and health folks that are here. We've been told that all of these potential contamination issues are going on around us, but we don't really see any comprehensive testing going on to determine what it is. We're told it's the agricultural runoff. We're told it's the birds. We're told it's the industrial. We're told it's all these different issues. But we're looking, I think, at this stage also to have some kind of comprehensive testing done, so that we can stop this or control or manage this kind of pollution that we're seeing.
Brian Hellner, 2653 Fuller Road in Bird. I just had a question. I couldn't really tell from the map. It wasn't really, easy to read. But is there anything going to be done north of the dam, or is that like another step down the road?
Great question. I know it's difficult to see. If you come up to the frontier, there are larger figures that are blown up. But to answer your question, yes. Everything north of where OU3 ends will be handled under additional action phases of the project.
Chris, do you want to mention that the two impoundments by the dams have been identified as depositional areas? And our plan calls for further evaluations of that.
Okay, yeah, so in one of the documents that are in the administrative record, which you can look at the document repositories, is the remedial investigation and feasibility study. If you look at those documents, they actually go into, as Pete mentioned, behind the impoundments of Newfane Dam, but more importantly, behind the impoundment of Burt Dam, there is a great deal of sediment deposition. And up here again, with the figures, I don't include this there, but this is what we call a conceptual site model, and this runs from the end of OU2 all the way down to Lake Ontario. And you can see, just by looking at the illustration, this piece here is the amount of material that's gauged to be right behind Burt Dam. And then this is material behind Newfane Dam. So as you can see, the amount of material behind Burt Dam needs to be handled differently. So that was another reason why OU3 was made smaller, when it was discovered how much material was actually behind the impoundment at that point. It's a great
Question. Approximately how many years are we talking about before the project is completed? And with regards to the removal of the soil in Lower Town, how is it going to be removed? Are those trucks going to be covered, or is the dust going to be, floating through the air? And have you contracted with trucking companies that will be willing to dispose of it in a proper manner? Thank you.
So the work on the residential properties along Mill Street in that area, we're focusing on the block we call Block 2. That work's going to start in about 2 weeks. Right? That's our current schedule. Could deviate a little bit. The trucks are going to be covered before they leave the property and then go to the disposal facility. We're going to have best management practices to keep the dust down. There's going to be a community air monitoring program where we continuously check concentrations of dust and add water or do whatever we need to do to keep those concentrations down. If we can't do the work safely, we're going to stop the work and take a look at what we can do to keep the dust down, slow it down, add more water, whatever the best management practice is. That's all laid out in our work plans that we have that have been approved. So I hope that addresses your question regarding the dust. Was there another piece to that? So Sevenson Environmental Services is the prime contractor performing the residential cleanup. It's being overseen through an interagency agreement that we have with the United States Army Corps of Engineers. We have a trailer set up on Mill Street, and so that's where the Army Corps and Sevenson is set up to keep track of daily activities. And they will be contracting out to various trucking companies. I don't know who they are at this point. So, but does that answer your question, Gene?
Good. That's great. Just a question, when will there be a meeting about operative unit number 4? Is there a future meeting for that, or is this pretty much it?
So we've divided operable unit 4 into 2 phases of work. The first phase handles, I think it's the first 32 or 33 properties. I'm not sure. You're part of phase 2?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're doing is collecting the data, we're sampling, we're sharing the results with each of the property owners as we have it, right? At that point, we will have to make a decision as to whether or not we need to come out with a new decision document or work under the existing record of decision. If that's the case, we'll have another public meeting. But regardless of that, before, what we've been doing with the phase 1 properties is before the work starts, we're meeting with the homeowners one-on-one, talking about the specific details about the work that's going to be coming on with respect to their property. So we're having, communications with the individual property owners ahead of the work starting. And so my expectation is that with the phase 2 properties, we would be doing the same exact thing.
When you say one-on-one, do you mean face-to-face or?
Face to face, in
Okay.
person. Yep. Suitable location, convenient for you. We sit down, we go over the detailed sampling results, show you the area where the data shows we need to dig, how we're gonna restore the property, and, the schedule for doing that work. And walk through any issues that you may have with respect to how that work is gonna be performed. So.
Thank you.
Blast it out here. Is there, you mentioned the contamination buildup behind the Burt Dam in Newfane. Is there, is there any confidence level that there will be future phases here that will move further down the creek? To address some of those issues or problems?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and the goal is to address further downstream of the end of operable unit 3 with further actions based on looking at the data, looking at the results, looking at the investigations. It will then be decided. I can't tell you now what operable units will be and how it will be handled, but it is something being looked at right now.
3098 Lockport Elk Road in Newfane. I've lived there since 1979. I've come to these meetings on and off for the last 45 years. When I first started coming to these meetings, a couple of the old fellows that I knew in the area said, "Hey, we've been coming to these meetings for 40 years, nothing's happening, blah, blah, blah." They're dead. So I'm sure I'll be the same way probably when it's all said and done. I appreciate that the quality of the creek has improved a ton. I see it in my backyard all the time. However, last Friday I was out kayaking in the Lake Ontario on the west side of over towards the bluff. Raw sewage, a lot of raw sewage is right in that immediate area floating around. I had to meander through that last week on Friday. I don't know where that's coming from, but I think that's certainly a concern. I'm piggybacking on Bill Clark's comment about the current situation of dumping things through. I also have a question about, I remember going to the first Earth Day, so 1970 or 71, and Alan Vandermark, I think was the gentleman's name, was insisting along the 18-Mile Creek, Rattlesnake Hill, was insisting that the things that they were putting in the creek were cleaning the creek, and it was a different color every time you went through there. Any old timers that went through there back in the day. What are some of those industries' responsibilities to some of these giganto fees that are going on? I mean, I know this is all federal stuff and state stuff, but aren't there some responsibilities to some of those gentlemen and some of those industries that are still going? I know a lot of them are gone, but some are still going. Again, I appreciate the quality of the creek. It's a big improvement, but there's a lot of work to do yet. And again, there's still stuff being dumped in the creek that has no business being in there. Thank you.
Great questions. So the first question you had regarding the raw sewage or sewage that you saw in the creek, that's not handled under the purview of the federal government. That would be something you'd have to find out from the city of Lockport and check with their systems and understanding to find out why that is and why that's the case. Regarding your second question.
Yeah, about Vandermark and other active
Correct.
facilities.
Yeah, active facilities. So under Superfund, we continue to evaluate. We look for potential responsible parties, or in this case, chemical companies or companies that could cause the contamination of the pollution. So that's an ongoing process. Right now, 18-Mile Creek, the entire work that you've seen in OU1, OU2, OU3, and OU4, there is no potential responsible party. This is being handled by the federal taxpayers. OU1, 2, and 4 is being handled on the bipartisan infrastructure law legislation money funding. That's how that's being handled. But we will continue to evaluate. That's why we have these community meetings. The community might be aware of something or know of some history that we're not aware of and could point us in the direction of another potential responsible party. So that would be why we can reach out in any communication that you might have or knowledge that you might be aware of can help obviously potentially find the PRP. As far as the state sites, I don't know, Steve, did you want to speak to either Vandermark or Vancor?
There's Vandermark Chemical is a state site. There is a remedial system along the creek, down gradient of the plant. The contamination of concern there currently is coal tar that was deposited there probably in the early 1900s before Vandermark Chemical was even there. Vandermark itself produces phosgene gas chemistries. So most of their stuff would be airborne rather than water-related or soil-related contamination. There is groundwater contamination also related to the coal tar previously that was disposed there. Vancouver landfill used to be a Vandemark landfill, and then the ownership of it went over to Vancouver Company, which is on Jackson Street, Pike Road. That landfill will be there. It's a capped and closed landfill, and it'll be monitored. It's currently monitored. In fact, the annual sampling is coming up in 2 weeks. It'll be monitored for a long, long time, but there's very minimal contamination associated with that landfill. It's an older landfill. And it's also a state site.
Thank you, Steve.
Lockport. I wanted to address, I don't have the answers to everything about the sewage treatment plant, but they are under the New York State DEC. So our sewage plant has to follow all of their regulations and rules, and we were working on, and we just started the UV system for sanitizing the sewage before it goes into the creek. And sometimes there will be an overflow incident, but it's really not that often. And I know that some other people told me that some of the houses along 18 Mile Creek go directly into the creek and are not hooked up to any kind of sewage line. It goes directly into the creek, and there's a number of houses that do that. And because when I asked the DEC, like, what is happening, what's going on with our monitoring and stuff. So I understand your concerns. I share them. And also there's discussion of the Newfane sewage facility treatment plant right on Lake Ontario, and how the currents and everything happen in the lake. So there's a lot of potential things that need to be looked at, and those are things that I continue to ask about.
Just a couple quick questions. One was, so you mentioned that there's going to be the community air quality monitoring. Is that going to be publicly accessible, like through is it EPA Air Now site or something? Is it, in general, is the data for that going to be available to the public to view in real time?
I don't believe it is. We can look into putting some of the data on once we've had a chance to kind of consolidate it. But the current plan is not to have it live, but we can provide updates to and post that on the website. We can look into doing something like that.
Okay.
Where, you know, again, I can't commit to exactly what we'll do, but we'll look at what additional information we could post on our website, whether it's any exceedances or anything along those lines. But we can go back and look at that.
Yeah, and also is that Army Corps that's doing their monitoring, or is it EPA?
So the air monitoring is going to be done by Simpson Environmental Services. It's their equipment. The oversight, the actual folks present there is the Army Corps of Engineers. They'll have a daily presence, and EPA will be periodically on site.
And so if people have concerns at any point during the process, is there a direct contact for them for Army Corps?
So our preference would be if you have any questions regarding the OU4 work, that is currently managed by Julio Vasquez, who couldn't be here this evening. Feel free to give him a call, and his number,
or myself.
or Chris. Julio's number is 212-637-4323.
So 212.
212-637-4323.
Or you can call me and I can get you in touch, yeah.
Okay.
We'll make sure you have the right number. Sometimes I get dyslexia with those threes and those twos, so I apologize. But when it comes to any of the individual homeowners,
Yes.
okay, we are working closely with them as we get closer to doing work on their block. So if any particular homeowner were to have a concern, we will definitely be sharing that information much closer. When it comes to the larger community and our ability to post that information or some of that information on the website, that's where, you know, I've got to go back to the team and see what we can do versus what might take some time. But for individual homeowners, they have any questions about what the data looks like for their property or the neighboring property, we will share that as soon as possible. Yeah, we're trying to have very close working relationships with each of the homeowners. And right now, we're focusing on this one particular block. Once the work starts, we're gonna keep rolling that out.
Thank you.
We're in a public comment period, 19 July to 19 August. If you have any comments that you would like, or you think of something like 2 or 3 days after you've left here, you can either call Chris, you can put them in writing, you can go on internet via email and send it to him, and we'll be more than happy to respond to those questions up to and including August the 19th. If there aren't any other questions, remember, we do have a website for 18 Mile Creek that we post all of our documents to, community update, all the activities that are ongoing with 18 Mile Creek. I want to thank you on behalf of EPA and the state, and thank you for coming out and taking the time. Remember, we'll close the meeting, but the state representatives and our EPA folks will be here for a while. If you have any questions, please feel free to go up to them. Enjoy the rest of your summer. Thank you very much.